What seemed like mountains of dead were thrown into the city. Soon the rotting corpses tainted the air and poisoned the water supply. Within days, the people inside the walls of Kaffa began to die. Those merchants who could escape hurried aboard their galleys and prepared to set sail for Italy. Flea-infested rats climbed the mooring ropes and hid in the holds of the ships that were heading for the Mediterranean. Little did the sailors know what a deadly cargo they were carrying. No one noticed that the shipboard rats were diseased. The galleys sailed from port to port on their long journey back to Italy, but no one would let them dock when it was seen that the sailors were dying. In October 1347, the merchants finally reached the port of Messina in Sicily. The terrified harbour masters tried to isolate the ships, but it was already too late. Even as the first mooring ropes were being tied, the rats were making their way ashore. Although the galleys were forced to move on, this brief encounter was long enough for the Black Death to enter Europe. Europe in 1348 was already overpopulated and beset with problems. Weakened by wars, harvest failures, famines, and other epidemics, the plague was yet another in a series of disasters to strike Europe. Churches were centers of learning, with unquestioned authority over the population. With no other explanations of life to turn to, people looked to the church and their local priest for spiritual support and solace. Michael of Piazza, a Franciscan friar, received news of the outbreak of plague just days after its arrival in Sicily. He prayed to God that the disease would not spread.
Pater noster qui es in caelis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostre libera nos a malo. Amen.
But his prayers were not answered. Within days, everyone who had had any contact with the dying sailors was dead. After a week, the plague had spread throughout the city of Messina. Carts loaded with corpses arrived at the churches almost by the hour.
Men were borne to burial by day and night, with only a short service. The houses of the dead were shut up, for no one dared enter them.
Those living in already overcrowded houses were oblivious to the arrival of the infected black rats. Fleas thrived in the filth and clung to the clothes of the dead, which were then sold or passed on.
When anyone who is infected by the disease dies, all who visit him or do business with him, or even carry him to the grave, quickly follow him there.
As the plague spread into the surrounding countryside, it was clear that no one was safe. Within a month, the Black Death had spread throughout Sicily. Friar Michael set off on a journey round the island. Believing the plague was decreed by God and that man should not oppose it, he hoped to bring spiritual comfort to the sick. Many priests had already died, but Michael was one of the few who would survive the plague and live to describe its horrors.
On the day the victim was stricken, blisters and boils appeared on the arms, legs, and neck. They so weakened and tormented his body that he had to take to his bed. Soon the boils grew to the size of a walnut, then to that of a hen's egg or a goose's egg, and they were exceedingly painful. The sickness lasted 3 days. By the 4th day, the plague had claimed another victim.
People reacted to the plague with astonishment, bewilderment, and terror. They thought they were witnessing the end of the world, God's punishment for all the sin on earth.
Kind God, I beg that your anger may cease, that you do not destroy sinners in this way, and that you do not allow the just to be condemned with the unjust.
Most people believed that the plague was literally hell on earth, the last triumph of evil before the coming of Christ in judgment. With hundreds dying every day, Michael was one of the few priests still devoted enough to give the last rites and pray for the souls of the dying.
In nomine Patri, Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Such was the number of victims that there was no more hallowed ground in which to bury the dead. Corpses lay abandoned. Bodies were buried hundreds at a time in plague pits outside the city walls.
What more is there to say? Corpses lay unattended in their own homes. No priests, sons, fathers, or kinsmen dared to enter.
Few who caught the disease ever recovered. So rapidly did it spread that it seemed one man could infect the whole world. Ships, with their lethal cargoes of infected rats and fleas, were the surest and fastest means of spreading the plague. Within days of a ship putting into port, the entire town would have been exposed to the deadly bacillus. From Sicily, the plague reached the mainland and swept across Italy. Following the trade routes, it spread in all directions, covering the land with a blanket of death. Travelers told stories of deserted villages and miles of countryside littered with bodies. In early 1348, Guy de Chiliac, a cleric and the Pope's personal doctor, heard news that the Black Death was only weeks from the papal palace at Avignon. Guy studied the movement of the stars and planets and reported his findings to his master, Pope Clement VI. He explained that God's warnings, heavy clouds, blasts of hot winds, falling stars, and a column of fire seen above the papal palace all signaled that a terrible affliction was at hand.
The configuration of the heavens is the cause of this pestilence.